Welcome to the Book of Urm, Chapter 16, Mother Tree. Mother Tree. Along their slow journey upward, they passed many additional openings to interior levels within Gorai, all of which seemed intended for storing reserves or moving large quantities of supplies. Serpendis finally deduced that they were inside an elevator used for large, heavy freight, but instead of ropes, pulleys, and other mechanics of engineering, the Scythians apparently devised different technologies on their own. Technologies that utilize light, sound, and crystal. How these feats were accomplished remained a complete mystery to Serpendis. The platform eventually arrived at the top of the shaft, and the clear crystal elevator shaft extended upwards until it ended in a perfect cut, slanted at an angle like a wind instrument. A large circular opening was cut in the side of the shaft, the same size as the one all the way down on the ground and each subsequent level. The city of Aeonwyrm lay before them and all around them. The crystal shaft was set in the center of a flat, angular area surrounded by tall, crystalline gem structures that towered overhead, each at slightly different angles. Beyond these crystal spires, in the direction of the city's center, rose the Mother Tree, filling the view and blocking out the sky. The ground was a patchwork of crystal shapes, etchings, grooves, and colors. Nearby, Serpendis identified a hexagonal shape about 30 meters wide etched into the crystal ground, and on each side were massive beams of twisting and curving lumber set horizontally floating on clear crystal supports. The tops of the wooden beams were badly scratched and covered with mildew. They reminded Serpendis of hitching rails found everywhere in Cananea, but he could not imagine the kinds of beasts that were used here. On one of the wooden beams perched 3 crows that stood far apart, all looking back at him and his companions inside the elevator. "Over there," Serpendis said, gesturing at the crows on the gigantic hitching rail. "The crows. Think they are the same as we saw at the Pool of Urm? What do you think they are?" "Watchful for certain," said Karui quietly, stepping out of the elevator with Kirgri on her shoulders. The rain continued to lightly patter on the flat ground and pool into the many grooves and etchings carved into its crystalline surface as Piecora followed Karui out of the elevator. Above, Serpendis saw heroes circling above them. He stepped out of the elevator and onto the crystalline floor of the open promenade as a wash of vertigo overcame him. He leaned on Piecora and asked quietly, "What does Hero see?" The air was frigid. The sky was a solid gray mass without dimension or volume, and the wind whipped around the buildings like baleful spirits playing through the crystalline structures like a crooning choir of dissonant voices. "We see the city as a gemstone, encased in ever-present clouds," Piecora said. "The Mother Tree grows from the city's center and casts its shade over all the streets and structures beneath its branches. We are very high off the ground, and Hero is unable to get above the clouds. Thus we can only see what is vaguely in front of us, as the mists allow it." She turned slightly towards Serpendis, but unseeing from her human eyes. "I see no life here, no people, no elves, no Scythians, no movement at all except the wind and the rain. Leaves fall from the Mother Tree, and the wind rattles its outermost branches, and the streets below are covered like autumn in a forest. Also, the city is overgrown, much like the Heartland is. Nature has overtaken this place, and its people have been gone for a very long time." Serpendis felt a lump in his throat at her heavy words. He didn't know which to feel more, fear or despair. What do we do now?" asked Serpendis quietly, breathing heavily. "We go to the tree," Karui answered. Piecora's eyes came back into focus as she looked at Karui. "What do you think we'll find there?" "I don't know," Karui answered, "but it's the only direction I can think of. It's the only way. We go to the tree, and we plead for help, if anyone is there." Just then, the three crows launched from their perch in unison and flew in different directions away from the companions. Serpentis followed them with his eyes as they each faded into the mist and disappeared behind the city's gem spires. "Someone is here, watching us," he said. "That is for certain." They crossed the wide-open crystalline promenade, leaving the clear elevator shaft behind them. They passed between narrow alleys of gem structures, winding crystal streets, and open areas where Serpentis saw etchings carved into the flat crystalline ground, marking what he perceived to be placements for carts and kiosks, similar to how the cobblestone markets in Coast Haven were mapped out with chalk and paint. They saw gem structures flowing into each other from one color to another, creating bizarre, fantastic, and beautiful shapes of curves and angles silhouetted within the flowing mists and gray sky overhead. They entered large, overgrown gardens where wild trees and thick, tangled weeds grew unchecked for hundreds of years. They wandered by pools, ponds, canals, and aqueducts choked with feral vegetation and decay. Despite the appearance of a gleaming city from afar with its kaleidoscopic color patterns in the sunlight, now that they were inside the empty city itself, they found the crystalline environment stained, streaked, dulled, and even somewhat eroded by several millennia of the intense high-altitude weather of the Fey realm. As the day wore on, the rain increased, the wind picked up, and the temperature fell even colder. Serpentis pulled his robe and Abrinalian Gaia overwrap close over his face as they entered the dark shade of the mother tree. Clouds of wet leaves and sticks blew from the streets and alleys. Overhead, the sounds of the wind blowing through the lower branches of omnipresent Shurai, the mother tree, were a constant sonic force of white, physical noise, at times even too loud to speak over. Darkness fell quickly here beneath the tree, and they huddled together beside an amalgamated gem structure of peridot and garnet that flowed together like bands of oily liquid. Hero landed on the ground beneath them, sheltering himself from the wind, rain, and flotsam. "How can we rest in this? Where do we make our camp?" shouted Piecora. "There's not even any decent wood to be found for a fire, just old, wet, rotted stuff." "I don't even understand how anyone lived here," Serpentis yelled. "Are there no buildings? Did they all sleep outside?" Karui suddenly looked up and began feeling around the sides of the peridot and garnet gem structure next to them. Abruptly, an angular opening appeared in one of the gem's facades. She fell headlong through and into the gem's dark interior, Kirgri falling from her shoulders as she disappeared. Stagnant, trapped air rushed out from the inside, carrying with it the scent of immense age, but nothing more. "Karui! Kirgri!" shouted Piecora as she lunged after her friend. Serpentis stood in the opening, peering into the darkness. "What do you see? I can't see anything. Are you all right?" "We're fine," Karui called back. "Let me find some light for you." "I hit my head on something sharp, but I'm all right," Piecora said. "I can't see anything. I'd be careful moving around in here." Kirgri signaled with chirps and growls. Serpentis saw a small flicker of flame in the depths of the gem's interior, and immediately the inside of the gem glowed eerily with refracted red, orange, and pale green light. From outside, the light was a soft, blurry haze visible through the gem's multifaceted translucency. "Come, both of you get out of the rain. Let me close the door," Karui said, setting down a little wax-brick candle that she brought with her from her tree home many weeks earlier, when she first met Serpentis and Piecora. Serpentis and Vinexi both strode through the opening and into the gigantic gem structure. The opening was large enough for them both to enter simultaneously, with more than enough height for them to walk upright. door?" asked Serpendis incredulously. "You sound like you already live here." "It feels that way to me in a way," Karui said while passing him. She touched a portion of the wall next to the opening, and the gem's surface rematerialized into the angular shape of the opening, sealing the companions inside with a dull hiss, followed by a crackling sound like the squeezing of tiny glass shards as the gem's surface rebonded itself together. The interior instantly became muted and still, and only the heavy winds could be heard from the outside. The gem's interior was a large open area composed completely of the gem's own crystalline mixed core of peridot and garnet, shaped in ways that served seating and eating and sleeping. Stairs led to an upper loft, and from there even more stairs ascended to further compartments within the gem structure. All around them were the furnishings, touches, and objects of a lived-in home long deserted. Serpendis remembered his thoughts when he entered Karui's tree when they first met. There's just a certain feeling one gets when entering someone's home, an abstraction of enduring comfort and identity. Karui's tree felt like a temporary waypoint to him, perhaps one of many that she had set up throughout the forest. But this place was absolutely someone's home, and although there was not a speck of dust, he could feel that it had been a very long time since it was inhabited. Karui laid more candles throughout the home, revealing a large table of crystal, several chairs shaped from gems, couches, even a shallow pool that was now dry. Serpendis saw dilapidated wall tapestries, blankets and rugs, sculptures and art objects of bone, various gems and wood. Karui went upstairs where she laid more of the small candle bricks in the upper compartments, calling down to them, "There are rooms up here, one for each of us if we wish to stay here. I think a large family, perhaps wealthy, lived here once." At first, the notion of staying here for the night was absurd to Serpendis, which he was about to announce emphatically, but then he stopped himself as the full realization of Cynthia's emptiness descended on him. He leaned closely and studied one of the frayed tapestries. This one had simple, abstract designs. It looked in fine condition despite the washed-out colors and frayed edges. He reached to feel it between his fingers, and the tapestry immediately disintegrated into acrid dust, starting in his fingers and spreading out quickly through the rest of the tapestry like a fire burns a dry field. Within only several moments, all that was left was a bare crystalline wall, and on the floor was a pile of dust where the tapestry once stood. "Gods," he said aloud. "This is a tomb, a well-preserved one at that." "Karui, better find some ventilation somewhere for this candle smoke," Piecora called. "Already found openings in each room up here," Karui replied. "I'll feel along the walls for more when I get down there." Venexi sat heavily on a low crystalline bench covered in blankets that burst into clouds of dust when he landed. He jumped back up while hacking and sneezing. "Careful, lad." Serpendis felt a cool breeze now circulating through the home from upstairs. "Don't want the owners to find their home was broken into when they return," he said sarcastically. Venexi stood up and sneezed his way across the apartment and upstairs to stick his head outside through one of the openings Karui found just as she was coming down. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Boy destroyed an ancient artifact, then breathed it all in. Kids have no respect these days. Careful touching anything in here," Serpendis said. Kirgri found a safe perch on one of the uncovered benches. Hero flew in from one of the openings above and landed on a wooden railing on the side of a crystalline landing overlooking the downstairs. That night, they camped in the middle of the main room floor of the apartment and ate what was left of their food. "We'll have to turn back if we don't find anything tomorrow," said Piecora. "There's nothing to hunt or eat in this entire city." "We will see what tomorrow brings," said Karui. "And if nothing, then we'll return to the Heartland and make our way until something changes our predicament. If we stick together and stay in Cynthia, we should be fine. There's plenty of food down there." The next morning they gathered their things and left the gem structure to a cold morning beneath the shade of the mother tree, with biting, whistling winds blowing from every direction. Leaves blew across crystalline streets and swirled over intersections. Puddles of water lay here and there, and when the wind caught the lower branches of the mother tree above, water showered down on them, along with snapped twigs and more leaves. Large plumes of cloud mist drifted through the city like haunting spirits, sometimes washing over them and dampening their skin, hair, and clothes. Puffs of trailing mist came with each exhale as the companions continued through the narrow streets of the city, ever toward the center and the mother tree, without finding a single living person, or sign of life, or any recent activity of any kind. Eventually, later in the day, they arrived at an arch within a tall, crystalline, semi-translucent wall infused with all colors of gems, as if melted and poured into the wall's shape. The arch was double-gated with crystalline bars, now pushed wide open and stuck in position from thousands of years of weather and overgrowth. Inside the gate was a gigantic, flat area with many paths and ancient remnants of gardens, pools, and aspects of meditation. Here and there, between the paths, were angular gem gardens, where countless tiny shards of multicolored gems were once carefully raked and maintained, so their surfaces were perfectly flat, organized, and composed a long time ago, but now overgrown and disheveled by lack of care. Arched bridges of wood and crystal crossed over these gem gardens in various places, now covered in moss and bracken. Several towers, taller than any of the others in the city, rose perfectly straight into the branches of the mother tree that embraced them. Unlike most of the city's gem spires and structures, which grew organically at odd angles, these towers looked intentionally designed, perfect and magnificent, and they rose higher than any other tower in the city, their full heights hidden by the large branches above. They continued from the arch and broken gate across the crystal promenade, stepping over large, deep puddles and enormous pieces of deadfall, some of which protruded from shattered crystal structures where they fell long ago and were never removed, the buildings never repaired. There were a few times when they had to duck beneath a large branch the size as a tree from Kiahalla, or climb up and over it, all the while carefully picking their way through pieces of shattered crystal that had collected sporadically into mounds and drifts by the winds or crossing over cracks and crevices in the crystalline floor. Occasionally, they heard strange bird calls of all manners of pitch, tone, composition, and complexity from the mother tree overhead that now filled their entire sky. Some of the calls were high-pitch, short, and brief. Others were low, deep, long, and drawn out. A sudden flapping of wings would occasionally disrupt the quiet, and these too were varied. A slow, heavy, laborious wing beat, like the rippling of the mainsail on a large ship, indicating something very large taking flight, or a sudden flutter of many smaller wings, as if dozens of small birds erupted into the air. Hiero flew close to the party and did not stray far, as these were not his hunting grounds, and both he and Piecora were extra cautious about his scouting role. Otherwise, there were no signs of life within the city, even here in the city's heart. Nothing moved except for the great high-altitude winds whipping through the crystalline city and the mother tree. Serpendis lagged behind, having difficulty breathing. Piecora stayed near and in front of him, often looking back at him with concern, but he would just wave her off. As night settled over the city, the companions were enshrouded in pitch darkness. Piecora was able to light a small torch after several failed attempts at igniting it with her wet gear. The surrounding terrain was soaked with cloud mist, and the lowest boughs of the mother tree were many stories above them, so there was no fear of anything catching fire unintentionally. After checking on Serpendis, Karui excitedly ran ahead to scout the darkness with Kiagri on her shoulders, as she felt like they were very near to the base of the mother tree. "We're almost there, old man," said Piecora, standing over Serpendis, who sat cross-legged on the wet, crystalline floor. The winds had died down, and there was a strange stillness in the darkness that was new to them since entering the city. "Karui thinks we're very close." "Close to what?" Serpendis asked, looking up at her. He leaned heavily on his right arm as old aches from old wounds began bothering him recently. His left shoulder hurt, his ribs hurt with each breath, and his ankle felt as if he had re-broken it. "Close to the end?" "Yes, I dare say. I'll wager on that, old girl." He managed a laugh between coughs. Piecora knelt beside him and said, "You're ill. I think this weather has finally gotten to you. Karui believes there is healing in the mother tree." "She chases a belief," he replied. Just then, they heard a whistle from the direction Karui ran toward. "Come, I think she found it." "Let's get you up and going," Piecora said, nodding toward Vinexi, who stood behind Serpendis, taking in the alien environment. Vinexi put his arm around Serpendis, and together they walked in the darkness, following Piecora's flickering torch. Serpendis watched the torch as a solitary wisp of light, dancing in front of him, surrounded by nothingness. He felt weightless and could no longer feel the ground beneath him. Finally, after what felt like hours, Piecora's torch revealed Karui to them. She was leaning against a solid wall of tree bark of oversized proportions. Deep grooves of impenetrable shadow coiled together in random paths, but a singular direction, juxtaposed by giant textures and swirling knots of bark that comprised the mother tree's massive, gargantuan trunk. Within the diameter of the torchlight, Serpendis could not perceive any curvature in the trunk, indicating the sheer size of the tree as nothing he could possibly imagine with his mortal mind, even if seen in the daylight. Karui smiled from ear to ear as she ran her hands over the bark of the mother tree, but when she turned, her smile disappeared, and her eyes went wide with concern. "Bring him here! Quickly!" she hushed, waving Vinexi to the tree. Serpendis felt his body dragged to the tree, then laid down on wet soil. He dug his hands into the soft earth surrounding the mother tree and smiled. He felt Piecora at his side. "Karui, now what?" she asked. I don't know," Karui stammered. "Spirits, can't you pray to whatever's living in this god's-forsaken tree?" Piecora asked angrily. Karui quickly placed her hands on the tree and began singing the same soft tune that Serpendis heard her humming inside her tree on the edge of Kiahalla. He lifted his dirty hand and grabbed Piecora's. "Darling," he whispered, "'tis not the rain nor the weather. This old body has taken as much as it can suffer from this fey realm, and it's been a hard walk. Let's turn in for the night, make sure to close the shutters, feed the cats, before you go to bed." Serpendis heard muffled voices, and slowly the darkness peeled away at the edges, revealing Piecora and Karui kneeling over him, blurry and streaked, as if he saw them through a wet pane of glass. Karui's face was blank and unreadable, reminding him of when they first met. Piecora was flush with anguish and anger, her emotions on full display. Tears ran down her face, streaking her Silagan ink. "Why?" Piecora sobbed. "I promised to take him home. I was his guide." "He is gone. You must accept it," Karui said. "He was an old mortal man. The Fey realm gave him the life that it gives all of us, but at such a cost for him. Mortals aren't meant for this world, especially here in Cynthia. Maybe I was wrong about everything. Maybe I led him to his death by thinking the Mother Tree would heal him, that maybe Vioyen would awaken and help us. But instead, I led him straight into the heart of the Fae, the source of the energy that created all of Cynthia, all of Kiahalla, the Eldar and Elvenkind, the same energy that was killing him this whole time. Serpentis saw Karui's beautiful pink and violet patterned face finally break from her blank stoicism, and she covered her face with her hands and wept. He wanted to reach out and console them, but he couldn't. There was something very peculiar about this moment, and he couldn't quite understand it, but he felt a certain detachment from the situation. "But why not me?" Piecora suddenly shouted. "I'm mortal. Vinexi is mortal. Spirits, what about Hero? Why are we spared? I've never felt so alive while my friend lies there." She broke off, unable to continue. "Because he had nothing," came a voice, speaking in the low Canonian common tongue. It was a completely new voice that Serpentis had never heard before. It was a male voice, thin, elderly, authoritative in a scholarly way. Piecora leapt to her feet and spun around, hatchet in hand and in the fighting stance of Stag Fieo. Karui too stood and turned defensively. He saw Vinexi, who was seated next to him, slowly rise to his feet and crack his knuckles. His realm of clarity shifted, and now he was seeing everything from above, including his own body lying at the base of the Mother Tree. The entire promenade before the tree was dark earth, strewn with fallen leaves and branches, not the crystal floor like the rest of the city. How was this happening? He thought to himself. What was? Then Hero took flight, taking Serpentis's vantage with him, and together they landed on a lower brand overlooking the sanctuary of Shurai. "Who are you?" Piecora growled. It was a man in a simple, heavy brown robe who stood before them, his face hidden within a deep cowl. He raised his hands and slowly withdrew the cowl, revealing an aged but youthful face with a close-cut, thin, grey beard, short grey hair that faded from his long receding hairline, and piercing hazel eyes like polished gemstones beneath half-closed lids, as if he had just woken up. "You know who I am," he said dismissively without aggression, but simply stated as fact that Piecora should have known her whole life. "But as to your question, yes, why not you, or you, or you?" He gestured to Vinexi, then looked up at Hero. "I'll tell you why. It is because, like I said, he had nothing," he continued. He spoke in a friendly manner like a teacher addressing a child, without pretension or arrogance. Serpentis noted there was no effort in the man's delivery to embellish or threaten or make anything more of his voice and his words other than the information they contained. He found himself instantly admiring and respecting the man for this, and for the first time he felt hopeful. The man that lies on the ground was old, his body brittle, unacquainted with this realm. Coming here was like a plunge into ice water. You'll feel wide awake for a while as your body slowly begins to fail. In the case of Serpentis Endium, master merchant of Cannonia, the Fey realm expedited his body's aging by overstimulating it. There was nothing anyone could do for him while he remained here. But as for you, Piecora Tyrolde, daughter of Bjorsten and Eudora, you are soul-bonded with Hero up there. Your unified soul shares two vessels. Thus, it will take longer for the realm to fatigue you. Eventually, it will wear you down too. This one, Vinexi Chullux of House Zarathadora, you have noble blood in you, and I think you know what I mean. You may be mortal, but you are more than human. Your lineage is powerful, and you are young. But perhaps more than all of that, you've let something in that you made a bargain with, the great beast that lies beneath the sea. This entity gives you sustenance." The man stopped speaking, but no one responded. His speech was articulate, refined, methodical, and without patronization of any kind. He spoke humbly from the position of someone who simply knows more about a topic than those he addresses. Serpentis guessed he must be Canonian for the eloquence of his speech, and perhaps a diplomat for his measured tone. Piecora stood frozen in place, staring at the man without moving or blinking. She gripped her hand-axe so tightly her fingers turned white. Hiero remained very still as well, but Serpentis felt the pressure boiling inside the raptor. "How do you know so much?" Karui asked in Banwarese through gritted teeth. "And what do you hear in this sanctuary so close to our mother? How dare you step on this soil? Speak quickly or die." Serpentis felt a rush of heat from beneath Hiero, and the air began rippling around Karui like a hot fume colliding with cold air. "Stay your powers, Karuilavi Karupichankamnata," said the man, kindly and non-threateningly. He raised his hands, palms forward, conceding himself to them. "I wish for no altercation between us." "He is the hermit," Piecora breathed in disbelief from her Fieo stance. "He is Tkurai." The words rang straight through Serpentis and momentarily splintered his thoughts. Hundreds of questions and reactions all collided at once, but before he could make any sense of them, the man answered. "I am," he said, lowering his hands, folding them together, and shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly. "And it is so good to see you, my child, after all of these long years." He then looked up at Hiero and smiled warmly. Serpentis felt Hiero hop and flutter his wings, but then he calmed down and issued a series of clicks and chitters from his beak as if ventilating intense frustration. Serpentis then realized that he wasn't actually seeing through Hiero's eyes in the way Piecora explained it to him when she switches her perception into Hiero. Rather, Serpentis viewed everything from an overall omniscience that existed around the bird. He was somehow tethered to Hiero, and he felt everything that Hiero felt, but was not inside Hiero. "Why have you come? Now? Here? Of all times and places?" Piecora asked, with both fear and reverence in her voice. "Have you been watching us?" Tkurai relaxed his posture and stepped forward. "I have been watching you, ever since you came to this realm." "The three crows," Karui said. Tkurai leaned his head toward Karui, shaking his head. "No, that was not me. But through many other means, I watched your tribulations and the bonding of your friendship." "The Abrignalians thought he was you," Piecora said, gesturing toward Serpentis's body. "Oh yes, I've been to Abrignalia many times," he said, chuckling, raising his eyebrows and rolling his half-closed eyes. He then looked at Kiagri on Karui's shoulders and gently waved a hand in greeting. "Hello, little one. You make your mother very proud. They know me well, oh yes. But of course, to them we all look alike, humans for that matter, sound and smell alike too. I can see how they would mistake Serpentis for a druid. That is why they saved him, as luck would have it." "Wait," Piecora said, raising her other hand with her palm forward toward Tkurai. Tkurai stopped where he stood and studied her as one studies a fine sculpture. "Before we go any further, can you save him? He died in the night. I promised him that I would guide him home." Her voice trembled with dozens of overlapping emotions, each one threatening to take over at any moment. Somehow, to his astonishment, Serpentis was privy to her thoughts and feelings in addition to Hiero's. Then he saw the knife belt around her waist and the tooth knife within its sheath at her side, and he realized he was right there, close to her and to Kurai and Karui on the ground. Either he was no longer tethered to Hero, or his sphere of awareness grew way beyond the raptor in the branches above, and he could flow his viewpoint around the scene playing out before him. It felt like he could will his conscience to wherever he wanted to be, instinctively, without any physical effort or resistance. Takurai raised one hand midway, palm forward, fingers relaxed in a gesture of clarification as if answering an anticipated question. "I already have," he said. Piecora relaxed from her Fieo stance, lowered her hatchet and cocked her head to the side. "What do you mean?" Takurai looked up and all around him in a slow sweep of his relaxed, half-closed eyes. Then, raising his eyebrows, he said to no one in particular, "You can speak to her." For several moments, the wind blew through the branches of the mother tree high above, and water rained down on them from the loosened boughs. Leaves rustled over the ground and floated through the air on cold, irregular breezes, and clots of frigid cloud mist rolled through the promenade, blanketing everything in moisture. Serpendis shivered, but his body remained motionless, lying on the ground, as he watched anxiously to see who or what the hermit was speaking to. But then the hermit locked eyes directly onto Serpendis, not his body, but himself among them, unseen by them. Serpendis realized they were not aware of him at all, despite being right there among them. "Go on," he said softly, blinking slowly and nodding his head as if assuring a child. "She needs you now." To Serpendis's horror, he realized that Takurai, or Lacranus among Canonians, addressed him directly. Until this moment, he never gave any thought to himself, nor could he make any sense of why he could see so much around him, including his own body lying on the ground. But something in Takurai's look gave it all away, and now he knew everything. "I'm here, old girl," he said, finding his voice. But only Piecora and Hero heard him. Piecora jumped nearly out of her skin and looked down at Serpendis. "No, not there," Serpendis said. "That old body had enough of this place. Now it can go into the ground. But I'm here with you." "Where?" shouted Piecora into the mist. Karui took a step back, watching her friend with sudden alarm. Kiagri climbed down from Karui and walked over to Piecora. He tapped the knife tooth. "If I may," Takurai said calmly with concern in his voice. "Thank you, Kiagri. Yes, show her. The knife. Elpinthos iskri kliaung driaganth, dronge." When he spoke the Abrignalian words, his voice used the throat voice of the tree gnomes on its own, without the need for massaging his larynx with his fingers. Piecora looked at Kiagri, then at Takurai, and said, "I don't understand." Serpendis felt her losing her wits and quickly tumbling into madness, fear, and anger, ready to lash out with all available means available to her from her training. He felt her Sienian instincts emerging to fight her way out. "Take Serpendis' knife, Piecora," Takurai said soothingly. "Unsheath it. Trust me, you can use it on me if you wish. Just feel it in your hand for a moment. Kiagri, step back, will you?" After tugging at her knife belt, Kiagri did as he was told and moved several paces away from the Sienjan. Piecora looked down at the knife and the belt that she put on soon after realizing Serpendis had died earlier that morning, and depleted herself of her tears. She slowly unsheathed the knife, staring at its smooth, straight point, glistening in the moist air. Takurai flicked his half-closed eyes up at the knife, then crossed his hands in front of him and said, "There now, talk to her, Serpendis, tooth of Bojan Cremaran." "Piecora, my Sienyan guide," Serpendis said quietly, "I can feel you now." Since unsheathing the knife and feeling her physical grip on him, his awareness was now complete. Piecora looked at Takurai and said, "You are Bojan Cremaran." Tukurai again rolled his eyes and chuckled modestly. "No, no, 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 I certainly am not. If I ever become that long in the tooth, you can just take me right out to pasture, as the Canonians say." "I don't understand," Piecora said, still holding the knife and eyeing it closely. Karui came and stood next to her, also staring at the knife with wonder, while trying to piece together what was happening through only the limited context she had, since she could not hear Serpendis's voice. Tukurai slowly walked up next to Piecora and Karui, looking at the knife lazily with his half-closed eyes, and spoke as a scholar who describes an artifact to a touring group of students. "What you hold is the tooth of Bourgeon Cremaran. That is not a figure of speech, mind you. It is literally her tooth, one of many that she leaves behind as she moves through the forest. It is sacred among the Abrignalians, and these weapons are made by them." His head twitched to the side, and he sighed a deep breath. "Bogian Cremaran, trees move as one, Aeonwyrm, infinity serpent. She can control time and the passage between worlds. She is the most ancient of the Fae, the Dragon Queen of Kiahalla, Lord of the encircling forest." Piecora and Karui stared at the knife, unblinking as this new revelation settled in. But Serpendis already knew everything that Tukurai spoke of, as it all came to him when Piecora drew the knife. "Your hermit speaks the truth, Piecora," Serpendis said. "I now linger within the knife, and I am tied to both you and Hiero. I will be with you always, so long as you have the knife. I also know a few other things. Bogean Cremaran. We met her many times already, but did not know it. She and the Morrigan are one in the same. She spoke riddles to us by the lake. The giant serpent who moved all around us through the trees, that was her and is her namesake. The three crows, that is the Morrigan also. Probably not a single day transpired when she wasn't watching us. And now I inhabit the weapon that we found inside the hole created by the tree stump creature that ambushed us." "Fitting name you have," Piecora responded to Serpendis, with her mind without speaking openly, similarly to how she spoke to him through Hiero. "Serpendis, almost as if you were destined for this." She looked at Tukurai and asked, "How has Serpendis come to inhabit this knife?" "I put him there, transferring his soul into the knife the moment his body expired," he answered. "A new vessel for him to survive the Fey realm and what lies ahead. You manipulate souls like you do with us, the Siengians, dividing our souls between animals and humans," she said slowly. "Yes," Tukurai answered simply, raising his eyebrows and locking eyes with her. He nodded his head rapidly, excited to hear her unexpected conclusion. "You understand now. You've learned so much since you and Hiero came together." "That is wonderful." He spoke plainly and honestly, as if completely unaware of how negatively Piecora viewed this predicament of her people and herself. "Why?" Piecora asked. "Why would you manipulate this man's soul or any others? Why wouldn't you allow him to pass on to whatever is waiting for him? Why would you disallow him the peace of his own death?" Tukurai turned his eyes as he quickly came to realize the sobriety of Piecora's question. He looked down and turned away. "That brings us to why I am here and near the end of our meeting for now," he said, while slowly walking away. "You wish to find your way home. The Cynthians cannot help you. Vioyen cannot help you. The Abrignalians cannot help you. But Bogean Cremaran can. She is the Aeonwyrm, the infinity serpent. She is the only one who can safely get you across the rivers of time and place that separate out worlds. But to earn her favor, you must do something for her. I've already brokered on your behalf, and she will not budge on this, and frankly, I don't blame her. Help her, and she will get you home." He turned to look at them, as if reminded by another detail for his visit that he had forgotten. "I am Tukurai. and the balance is all that matters to me, nothing more. This place—" He cast his eyes all around them and held his hands out to either side. "It has suffered for too long. It is time for things to change. Bogia will ensure this. She has been at work for over 1,000 years on this, and now the time has finally come. In case you're wondering, I had nothing to do with your sudden appearance in this story, but I take what the fates give me, and I use everything I can to maintain the balance. Since you arrived in the Fey realm, I saw the possibilities. And now here we are, on the cusp of it." He continued, "Do not think it cruel that I united his soul with the knife. I watched his vessel wither under the stress of the Fey realm, and I watched the love of family grow between the three of you, and even Venexi to some extent, who was not expected at all to enter this tale. But you especially, Piecora. I need you to be focused on what lies ahead, not distracted by sorrow or perceived failure. Besides, your client may still play a part in all of this before we're through." "What are you talking about?" cried Piecora. "You came here just fine, didn't you? Clearly you can travel between realms. Why can't you take us back home?" "Because I am Hierophant, one of three, and we cannot interfere directly with affairs that affect the balance of the world that is our stewardship. We may only influence them from afar. But more practically, I cannot help you, because I am not with you," Tukurai said, then faded from existence before their eyes. Immediately stepping through the fading vestige of Tukurai's presence, another figure emerged from the mist as a thick cloud drifted across the promenade by a heavy gust of wind. He was tall, with long, straight silver hair that glinted in the grey morning light with a metallic sheen. His long, pointed ears were twice that of Karui's, and they stood straight up as opposed to hers, which were angled more outward. His eyes were light green that glistened brightly like sunlit dew on a mint leaf. His face was soft, smooth, and eerily blank, as if his eyes, nose, and mouth were afterthoughts on an otherwise perfectly round foundation. On the warrior's face and down his throat were intricate arrays of thin, straight lines of blue, yellow, and green ink, juxtaposed in such perfect synergy, composition, and alignment that it was impossible to imagine a hand dexterous enough to apply it. He wore layered pieces of ornate hexagonal lamellar plating in green, yellow, and blue lacquer designs over sections of supple leather dyed in blue and teal that moved fluidly with his body as he walked. Beneath the armor, he wore light, loose-fitting fabrics of various intricate patterns in white, gray, and blue. A sash with geometric, angular designs of light green, blue, teal, and yellow accents crossed his torso. In the middle of the sash's abstract designs was the device of the mother tree silhouetted in blue and green within a yellow circular field. A silver tiara worked into the motif of woven leaves and twisting branches set with tiny sapphire and opal gems at its front lay on the warrior's brow. A silver coif hung from the sides and rear of the tiara, so finely linked that it fell like cascading water over the warrior's head and hair. Incorporated into the warrior's armor and vestments were many embellishments, decorations, ribbons, badges, ornaments, and accents of gold, silver, bone, wood, linen, and other materials and textiles. A nuaobi of thick, dark blue fabric secured by a saya cord encompassed the warrior's waist, and slung between the sash and his body were two thin swords, one short and one long, both slightly bent, secured within ornate blue, green, and gold-enameled sheaths. As Serpendis now shared somewhat of Bogea's mind, he knew who this newcomer was and his high station, but he could not recall his name. He understood the designs and accoutrements of the warrior's raiment. Some represented the house that he served, his family and lineage. Others were of the tower that he used to work from, and many were of achievements and recognitions. Some commemorated collaborations with other experts in his field, and others that were more personal, intimate reminders of his loved ones, his children, and the person he was when times were prosperous so long ago. Despite the majesty of the newcomer's prestigious vestments and lordly presence, everything that he wore was faded, tarnished, scratched, ripped, and torn, beaten and weathered from centuries of Fey realm hardship. The painted lacquer was chipped and peeling on his hexagonal lamellar plates. His patterned textiles were stained, ripped, and had holes in many places. He stood proud but exhausted before the companions, as if presenting himself to his peers after a long, turbulent campaign at war. He let fall a large duffel bag of patchwork leather that was slung over his shoulder. It fell to the ground with the sound of glass clinking inside. Alklableth uben voderon. Welcome, weary traveller, he said. I am Shadia Lom Shurvanga, the illuminated scholar, arch-sage of the Pinnacle, the Court of Willows, Aeonwyrm, Cynthia. I am a servant of Vioyen, our mother and queen, who sleeps within Shurai. I am prepared to die in her name. He spoke the greeting as if reciting a song performed countless times over his lifetime. While they still had meaning to him, the words fell lethargically from his mouth, extruded with effort to retain the grace and power they once had, but empty nowadays. Shadia Lom Shurvanga, thought Serpendis. He is among the leading chroniclers of the Eldar who write the recorded histories of the world since the coming of Aeonwyrm. High station, indeed. Karui stepped forward with her right hand extended in an elven gesture of peace and friendship, and said, Are you not Iadsi Damhai Reanmha Gusroil, those who live and fight? Yes, he said, noticeably deflated. He spoke now in Banwarise. How did you know? Shaman of the Banwar? He took her hand and held it to his forehead in recognition of kinship. I'm Karui Lavi, Karupikan Kamnata. We happened upon the pool of Vioyen, Karui said. There behind the falls we found your stores. It seems Cynthia has fallen into times of trouble. Yes, he said again, then moved past her and knelt beside Serpendis's body. He died this morning? He died during the night, Karui said, following him. His mortality was overtaken by— Fetch me the bag? He asked dismissively while inspecting Serpendis's body. Piecora stepped in between Karui and Shadia, her hand still gripping both hatchet and Bogea's tooth. She placed the point of the dagger on the back of the Cynthian's neck. You say you'll die in Vioyen's name. Will you die for being an ignorant Shaieth? She said in Banwarese. Pia! Cried Karui. Piecora stood over the crouched Cynthian, ready to push the knife through at any sudden movement. We haven't been acquainted yet, said Piecora to Karui without looking at her. Yet now we run his errands as he picks through my friend's corpse. Oh, make me glad to test the powers of this holy dagger on your neck, you pernicious Shaietha. Serpendis felt Piecora's mind on the precipice of unbridled rage, her Sienian nature breaking through. Piecora, stop! He beckoned. Shut it, merchant, she spat loudly. Shadia winced. I'm about to feed you Cynthian blood. Pia, please, pleaded Karui, but Piecora whipped her head around, and Karui lost her train of thought upon seeing Piecora's raging eyes. Maybe our esteemed visitor has forgotten some basics of civility, like proper introductions and explanations, and honoring our dead. Maybe he assumes we are beneath him. Maybe he didn't think we'd understand Banwaresi. Maybe he is willing to die for that, too. Serpendis reeled from the irony as Piecora, his Sienyan guide, whom he once thought was the standard of uncouth barbarism, now lectured a living Eldar on civil behavior within the heart of Aeonwyrm. I could never have dreamt this on my own, he thought to himself. Curses! I could have written a book. Why did I have to die? Please, said Shadia quietly, Please, forgive me. I beg you." "Get away from the body," snarled Piecora. "Speak like that to Karui again, and I will gut you and hang you over a spit for whatever passes for dogs in this land." Slowly Shadia rose from his crouch and walked several paces away between Piecora and the duffel bag. He then turned to face her and slowly outstretched his hands toward the soft earth beneath them. "Please, no more bloodshed," he said, staring at the ground. "Enough has been spilled here in this sanctuary. The soil of Shurai is soaked with it." He looked up at the mother tree's base, his eyes wet with tears. "Vyoyen stirs in her sleep from the nightmares that we fed to her in our own violence," he cried loudly, then in a whisper, "No more! No more!" He looked at Piecora and recomposed himself. "Please forgive me, warrior. I beg you, not as Eldar, not as Scythian, nor scholar or chronicler, but as one beneath you now, for I have disrespected you in this holy place. I wish to now make it right. Please tell me your name." "Tell me why you're here," Piecora snapped, undeterred by his softening behavior and unwilling to give him anything that he hasn't earned. "I come on behalf of Bogean Cray Maran, Queen of Kiahalla, our protector," he answered. "We, the Yadsi Damhai Rianmaha Gusroela, have been working with her since the fall of Aeonwyrm over a century ago to assemble the pieces of a plot that we hope will undo the damage done to people, heal our lands, and repopulate our society, for we are all that is left." Piecora moved in front of Serpendis's body with her weapons out, still simmering, but slowly beginning to cool beneath the scale of Shadia's words. "This is a lot of context to absorb all at once," she said, waveringly. "I'm not sure I—" "Please, we do not have any more time," Shadia implored. "Every single moment that passes puts us in greater peril that you can't understand. Not yet. I promise you, on my life, that I will explain everything. But there are things we must do quickly before we are gone from this city." "Why? There's nobody here. What's the rush?" asked Piecora incredulously. Shadia took a moment to bottle his initial response, which would have certainly made things turn for the worse with Piecora. He turned around, lifted his bag, and slowly approached Piecora. "Yes, there's nobody here," he began, keeping his tone even for fear of inciting Piecora again. And only a few hundred of us, maybe less, we don't know. We are all that is left of Cynthia. The Yadsi roam the encircling forest, trying to survive in the very same forest meant to protect us, the same threats, the same predators, the same dangers as those who venture from the outside, like how one's body might kill itself by purging a perceived disease. Then there is the actual enemy, which by Bagaya's grace you have apparently not met yet. But they can be here in an instant. They can appear anywhere, and then it's already too late. So we fight them from the shadows, using methods of surprise and entrapment. These enemies try to leave Cynthia and enter the outer world, your world. But the encircling forest is dangerous for them too, and we make it perilous with help from the Fae and Bogean Cray Maran. The major fighting is over, but the war lingers in isolated skirmishes and clashes within Kiahalla that we have been fighting for many generations of mortals, and thankfully the outside world knows nothing of it. And now we are almost ready to turn it all around. You are integral to this." "Us? How?" asked Piecora. "Because of Dethrial Bnak, Alakai to elvenkind, Lacranus to humankind, to Kurai to you, the hermit of the Sienjan people. He told us that you would be necessary for what we are trying to do. He and Bogean Cray Marane are working together in this endeavor, and we were told to wait until you reached Aeonwyrm and the sanctuary of Shurai before we could reveal ourselves." "You keep using the plural, yet I only see you," Piecora said as he came closer. Her weapons were now down by her sides. I say this because I am still hopeful that there are others, that I am not the only remaining Scythian left alive. The Iadsi are lost and isolated in the forest. We fall prey just as easily to the perils of the forest as anything else. Only Bogean Cremaran protects us, because she is sworn to do so, but she cannot be everywhere at once. Honestly, I have no idea how many of us there are. It could only be me. He stood still and locked eyes with Piecora, his eyes heavy from the long years of constant fighting and hiding from one secret Yadsi camp to another. Serpendis felt her heart sink for the lone Scythian. I too know what it is like to not have a home, she said, although my situation is small compared to... Shadia placed a hand on her arm and said, "No, do not say that. We all live our lives within our worlds, and none are greater or smaller than the other so long as we share this one world together, and we have understanding for one another." Serpendis felt Piecora's racing heart leap at Shedi's words. Then she began to calm down. She looked up at him and said, "Then let us know each other, and do what must be done. Beginning with proper introductions. This is Vinexi Chulux of Muth, Kiegri of Abrignali, Karui of Banoir, and this is my friend Serpendis, Tooth of Bogian Cremaran, whose empty vessel now lies beneath the mother tree of Shurai. I'm Piecora Tearold of Sienja, Guide of the Wildlands." Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.